This morning, we are inching closer to a November rematch. Presumptive nominees, President Joe Biden on the Democratic side and former President Donald Trump on the Republican side, swept their respective primaries here in Illinois and several other states yesterday.
Here's a look at the results. As you mentioned, on the Democratic side, no surprise, President Biden is the projected winner. He also won in Kansas, Ohio, and Arizona. The Democratic primary was canceled in Florida, with the party instead opting to award its 224 delegates to Biden. And as expected, Donald Trump won on the Republican side. Trump also won in Kansas, Ohio, Arizona, and Florida.
Well, we want to break down all the results of last night's Illinois primary with the help of an expert.
And one we know well, we're joined by Dr. Stephen Maynard Caliendo. Good morning, the Dean of College of Arts and Sciences and a political science professor at North Central College. So we want to start by talking with the main story, I think, from this election, the low voter turnout. The Chicago Board of Elections calling it shockingly low at one point yesterday, around 20%, with a lot of young voters just sitting this one out, not even going to the polls. What do you make of it?
Yeah, the nerve to get a college professor on here and then ask him whether young people don't vote. I got to tell you, this is personal to me. It's really, no, I'm sure they all went out. We had 100% voter turnout of North Central students. This is really problematic because it's only getting barely to 20%. It's an embarrassment. It's a presidential election year. Right? I mean, we understand that on the top of the ticket, there weren't meaningful contests by the time we made it to March when we were voting in Illinois.
But Biden and Bunt
had already secured
delegates to get the nomination.
That's right. Essentially, they're kind of both incumbents in a way, right? I mean, it wasn't much of a race. But there's a lot of important ballot initiatives and races that were down ballot, and they really needed to show up, and they didn't.
Right. And you know, the message about voting in those smaller races and the importance of it seeming to get lost. One of those races, of course, is the race here in Cook County to replace State's Attorney Kim Foxx. Right now, it's too close to call. What do you make of that, especially considering the current frontrunner was not the Democratic-backed candidate?
That's correct, right. It's a complicated situation, and of course, so often in Chicago, the Democratic primary is the main contest. So whoever emerges from here is likely to be the new state's attorney. But Bob Fioretti's waiting. Right. I mean, we may have a meaningful contest in November because people are voting not as progressive as they had voted with respect to the mayoral election and other elections. In this particular one, they're voting more conservatively. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in November.
This one really could come down to the mail-in ballots. I mean,
that's right.
It could change. Right. It's only what, a two point, roughly
right.
2.5 point.
Clayton Harris trailing Eileen O'Neill Burke by that.
That's right.
Mayor Brandon Johnson's Bring Chicago Home ballot initiative and that question, the referendum, seems to fail.
Looks like it's going to fail. Yeah.
We got a lot of chatter about this pre-election and legal challenges, of course, to raise the one-time transfer tax on the sale of $1 million properties in Chicago to help fight homelessness.
That's right.
A huge defeat for the mayor?
I think it's a significant defeat for the mayor. He campaigned on this issue. It wasn't something that sort of just emerged in the last few months or over the first year of his mayorship. He campaigned on this issue. He was out in front of it, but there was significant money put on the no side, in terms of a campaign. And I think that the wording of that ballot initiative was vague enough that it created problems, especially for renters. They weren't sure how much it was going to affect. So you can sort of say, this tax is going to be on people with over $1 million properties, but is it going to trickle down? Is it going to affect ordinary folks?
But there was also a decrease baked into that, though, so it was a little log roll.
It was supposed to be for homes. That's right.
Right. Let's take a look, too, at talk about the 7th congressional race, Danny Davis's district. He received, what, about 52% of the votes?
Over half the percent, with several people in the contest.
But that was my question. So considering he had 4 challengers,
that's right,
and you could argue split the vote, would it have been very different, do you think, if he didn't have 4 challengers?
I think that's an important question, and I think the last at least 3 election cycles for Danny Davis have raised this question: has he outlived his usefulness? The voters have said no. He's sort of having seniority and being in Washington with the seniority is an important thing, but we keep seeing these challengers sort of getting close. When you have that many, though, it's very difficult for any one of them to emerge and to be victorious. So you can presume that most of the people that came out and voted against Danny Davis would have voted against him no matter who they're voting against the incumbent, a longtime incumbent, rather than for one of the challengers. And so Yeah, I think it's a fair question.
As Danny Davis said yesterday, don't count out the senior citizens.
Don't count out the senior
15th term?
citizens.
Yes, it will be his 15th
That's right.
term.
That,
Yes.
I mean, this is incredible.
Absolutely.
But, and another win for the political establishment in Chicago with Chuy Garcia winning in a landslide over Chicago Alderman Ray Lopez in the 4th District.
That's right. And that one, again, I think if we had to make a prediction, and I don't make predictions before elections, especially on the air, that I would have predicted that. But the fact that it was called so early because the gap was so large, that was a little bit surprising. But it was a good night for incumbents overall, for the most part. And I would also say it's a good night for former President Trump-backed Republicans nationwide and in Illinois. Now, whether that translates into success in November is a different question.
If we have time for one more question, I want to go back to voter turnout.
Yeah,
all right, 20%. It might be the lowest primary turnout, at least in Chicago, ever. We're still waiting to confirm that.
It's at historic levels.
Right.
If it's not, it's right there.
Right. It's certainly since we know 2012.
2012 was the
so
last, right.
what do you think needs to happen to engage voters prior to November, or do you think that turnout will be bigger because now there is, as some might
stakes
say,
are higher.
a contest?
Well, it'll be much larger than 20%. There's no question in November. And Illinois has historically been right around the middle of the country in terms of right around whatever the national average is. Illinois is there or just a little bit higher. So I have high hopes that there'll be better voter turnout in November. But the way you asked the question, Dana, is exactly right, is what else has to happen to engage voters? For many, many years, political scientists believe that the low voter turnout was largely due in our country to our weird laws, that we vote on a Tuesday. It's not a national holiday. Lots of states have very restrictive. But in Illinois, of course, we removed most of that. We're still voting on a Tuesday, but you can also vote for 2 weeks before in many places. You can vote by mail without an excuse of being out, and it has an increased voter turnout. And so we'll see. If it changes in November, then maybe we're having a different conversation then.
I hope we are.
I think if
I
people
really
wanted
do.
to vote, they would have.
That's
We've
correct.
been talking about early voting at
No
two
question.
supersites for a month now.
Yeah.
More than that. So,
Ryan, you're right.
Yeah,
You're
we'll
right.
wait until
You're right.
November and see
You're
what
right.
happens.
Yeah. All right, Stephen Caliendo, thanks so much. We'll be talking with you again a little later.
Okay.
We appreciate your
See you at
insight.
6. And for full election results, head to our website, cbschicago.com. We'll continue to update these numbers as they come in this morning.